Okay, so my name is Gary Katz. I'm a Solutions Director and Senior Account Executive with MarkLogic State and Local Practice. This is my second time at MarkLogic. I was actually here once before, and in between my stays at MarkLogic, I was the CTO for the National Security Division of a large data integration vendor, where I got to understand how the traditional MDM technologies work. My background's actually in computational linguistics going really far back, so master data management is a pretty good fit in that regard, as well as MarkLogic for that matter, because it involves search and involves modeling and it involves identity resolution. So it's a very good nexus. But what really attracted me back to MarkLogic, to really pay attention to how MarkLogic can solve this problem, is the consolidation that MarkLogic provides in one platform to be able to do identity resolution and master data management in a very novel way, in a way that actually simplifies the process and frankly was a bit of a headache when I was not at MarkLogic. So in my current capacity with MarkLogic, I support our state and local business. We're going to be seeing a demonstration today of mastering capabilities as it applies to the Medicaid space and what we call our MarkLogic Data Hub for Medicaid, where we take in person data and claims data and provider data, and we find a golden version of truth for that. But before I go into that, the Medicaid specific piece, because we're really not going to go too far into Medicaid so much as mastering, it's helpful to understand why traditional MDM approaches are difficult. And really what it comes down to is the complexity of performing the systems integration required in order to stand up and get an initial operating capability in your MDM solution. If you want an MDM solution using traditional technologies, you're going to need, starting from the bottom up, data connectors to your individual data sources. You're going to need some kind of an ETL tool in order to move that data out. You're going to need a separate data quality capability, a separate lineage and provenance capability. You're going to need the identity resolution capability. You're going to need the underlying database where you're going to store those records, which is going to be yet another product. And then you're going to have security and alerting and governance and all these other tools bolted on top. And these are all separate products. They may be from one, corporate family, but they tend to be separate code bases, not something that's very, homogeneously put together. So you sort of put together this Franken architecture that you need to balance, which creates problems. It's going to create configuration management challenges. It's going to create skill set challenges. It's going to create time to mission challenges, because by the time you've stood this up and gotten to initial operating capability, you're 12 to 18 months out from when you first started the project. And in MarkLogic, we simplify that process drastically. And that really was the amazing part. So MarkLogic is the back end of healthcare.gov's and the Data Services Hub. And we are actually the master person index for healthcare.gov. When we first implemented the master person index, we didn't have any formalized mastering process. All we had were MarkLogic's native capabilities in order to implement identity resolution. It took 2 FTEs, 2 months to stand up the master person index inside of MarkLogic. And that is before there was any formalized process for it. Now we've since formalized that into the data hub. You can perform mastering in hours. You can perform mastering in days and weeks before you get the entire thing stood up, versus months or years before you have that implemented, with all of the governance and security and data discovery capabilities all built directly into the core. So why does traditional MDM usually fail? Because you have to know everything you got to do up front in order for it to succeed. You have to imply all of your own lineage and provenance capabilities to track how data got to where and when it changed and who made that change. You have to go and implement all of the discovery tools for finding the MDM pieces all on your own, which means that if the world were perfect and nothing changed and new data sources didn't come in and existing data sources didn't change over time, yes, you could do it. And you'd invest the time, you'd get it done, and it would last forever. But we all know that that's not practical, and that data changes and requirements change much faster than that, and you need to be able to adapt. So this is why a lot of those projects tend to fail. What MarkLogic provides is a data hub that provides all of that systems integration work that you traditionally need to do on your own in order to implement an MDM solution. It provides it upfront in one tightly coupled platform, one code base where MarkLogic's core capabilities are the foundation. And you can immediately throw your data into MarkLogic and start moving it through a process and have a business steward actually implement the integration capabilities. You don't need an expert PhD in linguistics identity resolution in order to get mastering performed inside of MarkLogic. You just need someone who can work through the screens and the workflows to say, yeah, I'd like to go and do two names that sound alike, and I want to do it based off of, how much I trust one source versus the other. It is very easy to implement and execute mastering in MarkLogic out of the box versus what you would need to do in order to stand up that system in the first place, much less have people with the skill sets in order to execute those missions. So with that, let's just jump into some mastering capabilities. So I'm going to fly through a couple pieces here. The question is, who is Bob Smith or who is Rob Jones? And, traditionally the answer to that is, well, the only person who really knows that is Bob Jones's mother, right? That's going to be the person who definitively knows. Absent that kind of knowledge, we have to figure it out in some other meaningful way. So you have two kinds of mastering strategies. You've got truth-based and you've got trust-based. Truth-based is, how much do I trust the individual sources of the data that are coming in and the veracity of that data as it applies to the mission that I'm trying to work and the problem I'm trying to solve? Trust-based is more of the application. Truth. I just switched those. Let's strike that, reverse it. Trust-based is how much I trust them. Truth-based is how I choose to implement an algorithm to say, I'm going to match these two names together. We're going to see that there can be some tricky examples of that because language is infinite with infinite possibilities. And there's infinite possibilities for possibilities. So you have to apply the 80% rule to say, I'm going to capture most of the like identities. But then when I find identities that are a close match or a maybe match, I can't let them fall through. I have to flag those for review. So usually in an audience environment where I'm speaking directly to a customer or a prospect, I would play a game at this point. But since I don't know anyone who's on the call, except for the folks who I work with at MarkLogic, who have undoubtedly seen this already and know the answers, I'm going to kind of walk through this quiz. So we've got two people. We've got a Jeffrey Katz. We've got a Gary L. Katz. We've got their names, place of birth, year of birth, doctors and dentists, i.e. providers, the college or university they attended, the major, freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior year addresses, year of graduation, first employer out of college, and first two subsequent addresses. So as I look at these two people, I see Jeffrey and Gary. Okay, those are different names, and I see that they've got a lot of the same address information in here. Are these two people the same? At first glance, my answer to this would be maybe. They're possibly twins, right? That happens. It seems like they have, different majors, but they've lived together. But then they're in college, and their subsequent addresses change over time. So a temporal aspect of this is actually quite important. Jeffrey and Gary aren't exactly the same, but if I run those through a SoundX or a double metaphone algorithm, it actually compute to be somewhat similar because there's a hard starting J and a hard G. They end, they have an R and a Y in them, and their last names are the same. So this is a maybe. I might merge these two folks together. What about these two people, Gary J. Katz and Gary L. Katz? So now I look at these folks, their years of birth is off by, a few years. Their graduation years are also off by a few years. They have different majors. They have different living and address residences throughout college. So yeah, they've got the same name and they seem to be from the same hometown area. I should probably qualify that Bucks County is a suburb of Philadelphia. But I'd say that these are probably, if you're guessing, these are probably two different people who are off by a few generations. That's probably a good guess, right? So I would not merge these two people together. Last quiz that I usually give is this one, and then we'll stop the guessing games here. Gary J. Katz and Gary L. Katz, both born in 81, from the Philadelphia area. Generally, they have the same providers, they have the same major, they seem to live together. Their freshman year address is one floor apart. There's a 610 and a 510, but otherwise everything seems pretty consistent. Your graduation's the same. They both worked at Lockheed Martin. They seem to live together. Yeah, this is, in all likelihood, this is probably the same person. They've got a different middle initial. That could be a typo. So I'd merge them together. Or rather, I should say most people might merge them together. And if you guessed that, I would tell you humbly that you'd be wrong. Because in reality, my best friend and I have the exact same first and last names. We are tremendous narcissists. We are friends with each other. We both grew up in the Philadelphia area. We both had the same hometown. We both had the same doctors and dentists growing up, not knowing each other and not knowing that the other attended those same providers. We both randomly went to Penn State together. We were randomly assigned to the same dorm building, one floor apart. Probably not random, probably someone in housing with a sick sense of humor, but that's fine. We were both computer science majors. We roomed together sophomore through senior years. We were on the same senior design project, translating natural language queries into, SQL 92 statements for third normal form databases. We both graduated, went to Lockheed Martin together. When I left Lockheed Martin, he was the backfill in my group. We lived together for a couple of years outside of college, and then our paths deviated. So on paper, we look tremendously alike. So what do we learn? Other than the fact that I'm apparently entirely replaceable. Linguistic identity resolution isn't in itself sufficient. It's only one lens by which you can look at a problem, right? And it's not necessarily bad. It's linguistic identity resolution. It's the most you can do. Anyone who looked at that third example, including me in most cases, would have merged those records together. And admittedly, we're a corner case, but there are a lot more corner cases than you'd think that there are. And those are usually the ones that cause you problems in MDM environments. It's not the easy John Smith scenarios. It's where you've got two people, John Smith and Jonathan Smith, who look very similar. And it's not just linguistic. It's incorporating other information that makes it tricky. Well, think about George Foreman and all of his kids, George Sr., George Jr., George III, George IV. They all lived together at one point, probably would make it difficult unless you had birth year and things like that you could try to assess. So as a side note, I do like to show this is me and my family, and this here we are. And in the event of my untimely demise, we do have backup photos taken with my doppelganger. I show this as a bit of dark humor. I also show it to show that this is not, in fact, a contrived example. This person is real, and he is one of my very best friends. So how could we have figured this out better? Well, one way to do that would be by leveraging relationships. If you were to look at Gary J. and I over the course of time and location with a semantic lens to this, you get a much better picture of where we converge and where we diverge. Earlier on, we were much closer together, both in terms of proximity and in terms of, where we lived and our courses, and our friend network was all very much the same. But as we moved beyond, I moved to DC, he moved to Baltimore, we went to different employers, and our family relationships are inherently different as well. And if you look at things through a family relationship lens, and in Medicaid, that's actually a very important application at times for program integrity or for establishing who has what benefits and who's claiming what child. If you've got multiple parents who are in the system in broken families that are structured differently, you may want to know that kind of information so that you can assess who is the right person for which the benefit belongs. This is something that's unique to MarkLogic. You could run a custom job that could look at a graph-based network and use that as a discerning factor as part of your mastering strategy. That is something that you could do inside of MarkLogic. You could also look at this data through the lens of geospatial and temporal lenses in order to assess, hey, how does this change over time? Yet something else that's also important. So that kind of brings us to the end of, the preface session here. I'm going to jump directly into an example of how we do this. This is what we call matching and linking via smart mastering inside of MarkLogic. So with that, MarkLogic, sorry. So let me pull up my demonstration environment. So I'm going to log in as Dr. Smith to our demo environment here. And Dr. Smith is a highly privileged user. He can see everything. We also have another user in here called Mr. No PII, where Mr. No PII can't see PII. We're going to log in, and we're brought directly into our Data Hub Community Edition environment here. And we've mapped out a Medicaid-based scenario here where we've got members. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. We have members. We have claims that leverage a standard called FHIR. That's not really relevant for this conversation other than to know that we've been able to help model what claims look like into MarkLogic. Claims have individual claim items. So you can have one claim that goes in that has 5 different doctors visits on top of it. And each claim item is related to a particular provider. And oftentimes these systems have case management type things that are associated with them. So we built in, relationships to case management and case workers and different exhibits that are associated with each case into this model. And of course, notably, members have relationships to themselves by vis-a-vis dependents, and they have parents and their children. So I've taken the liberty of loading some data in just completely as is, if you will, into this model. And I've done this via the integration tab. And this is simply a series of steps by which we can load and manipulate data into the model that we've prescribed on the prior screen. So I've loaded in claims, I've loaded in something called Curum, which is a representation of members in XML format. I've loaded in some what's called MMIS capabilities that are here that are further member information. The only thing I really haven't run here is the mastering. So if we look at the data in a pre-mastering capacity, I'm going to search for someone named Drindy. Drindy, D-R-E-Y. Now, as I look at Drindy, I'm going to see that I have multiple different versions of it. I've got Drindy spelled with a Y on the end. I have a Drindy spelled with an I on the end. The address information so far is all the same. I've got a day over here where I have the first name and the last name transposed. And I also see that Drindy has relationships to someone named Nuno. So if I look at Nuno, I see Nuno Day with a particular social security number. And then I also see another Nuno down here as I click. That is Nuno Day Jr. with a very different social security number. So top level, what we're really looking at here is we see that Drindy has, there appears to be one Drindy who has a relationship with her husband and spouse, and they have a child, Nuno Jr. But right now I have these represented as 3 different entities for Drindy, and I have 2 rightful entities for Nuno. I'm going to look at one other person here, Mohammed. We're going to take a look at Mohammed's graph here. And Mohammed, when I search for Mohammed, and notably, by the way, keep in mind, I'm searching for Mohammed, but I'm getting all the different various versions of the name for both Mohammed and same for Drindy, right? So this is part of MarkLogic's underlying capability to leverage this kind of context and linguistic capability to expand out the search. And when I see here, Mohammed, I click on MetMet. I see that I've got social security number of 1191 on the end. I see another Mohammed, also 1191, same address, same for this Mohammed and that Mohammed. But then I've got this Mohammed out here, and he's got a slightly different social security number. Now, it's 1190 on the end, as you can see right over here. Now, that's not a big difference. That's a reasonable typo. Now, if we were doing a greedy merge on these folks, we'd say that these are unrelated people, and we'd lose this Mohammed. But MarkLogic's mastering capabilities are quite capable enough to handle this kind of user error, if you will, or data entry error, to be able to help capture this. So now, let's go back and run the mastering flow. So I'm going to run the mastering step here, and I'm just going to run these. And while this is running, I'm going to jump into each of these steps. So we have a match step and a merge step. Now we're talking about person identities. So what we do when we're looking at person identities is we break down the attributes that are relevant to a person that we want to match upon. So we're looking at things like social and last name and address information, year of birth, month of birth, day of birth, and you can see associated weights with each one. This is what we would call the truth-based mastering, right? We're associating weights that are part of this algorithm, but we're assigning specific, to social security number. Usually it's right, but not always. And we're setting two thresholds down below to say, if it's over 60, which is an arbitrary number that in sampling this data we've decided is pretty good, then we're going to merge them together. It's not over 60, but it is still over 43. We're going to flag that for human review. And then the next piece is the merge step. And in the merge step, we're doing a very simple merge here, which is we're going to take the longest name and we're going to merge that and make that the golden record. But the notable piece here is the source weight. We're saying that for social security number, we trust the MMIS data source that we loaded in more than we trust the Curum data source. This gets back to the trust-based mastering, which is if I have banking information, HR information, and sales information, I probably trust the financial numbers out of my banking repository more than I trust any financial numbers out of the other two. So I'm going to give it more of a weight. That's the same situation here. So we get to apply the best of both worlds between truth-based and trust-based mastering inside of MarkLogic. So with that, I think my mastering is probably completed by now. I'm going to go back to my Explore screen. Now I see Mohammed has merged and completely folded. I see all of the different Mohammeds that are listed here, that are merged into this master record and the data sources from which they came. If I click on the info tab, I see that I have all of the lineage of how and when this was merged. This is good. This is exactly what I wanted. And I have, even though they have different social security numbers, I still got that one dangling Mohammed who was out there merged into my golden record. Now, when I go to Drindi, let's see what happened with Drindi. Use MarkLogic's built-in search. I search on Drindi, I click on Drindi, and wonderful. I've got a fully merged Drindi record with, that I wanted, that's showing one Drindi. However, I also seem to have a fully merged Nuno. And that's not right. Because when we looked at Nuno, we said that Nuno was a father-son relationship there. There was a Nuno Day and a Nuno Day Jr. So this is an error. This should not have happened. I understand why it happened. The names were very similar. And the scores totaled beyond, because of all the likeness, beyond what the social security number in and of itself could have outweighed. So in MarkLogic, I'm just going to hit unmerge, right click, unmerge. Am I sure I want to unmerge it? Yes, I am. I unmerge them. Now I've got my two Nunos relating back to my one golden record here of Drindi. And these records are completely as they were before I merged them, with the full lineage of what I did when I merged and unmerged them. So I know every action that was taken on this record, the merge and the unmerge. Now, MarkLogic makes this look easy, and that's for a good reason. Because in MarkLogic, it is easy. It is not hard to do this because of the way that MarkLogic does mastering, because we have total visibility into all the records that are inside of MarkLogic. In traditional systems, if you've ever had to do an unmerge, you'd probably much rather have a root canal, because it is difficult. It is hard because they do reference-based mastering overwhelmingly. That is not what MarkLogic does. We have all of the raw authoritative data inside of the data hub. So for us, if I've got 5 records that are merged together, but one of them is wrong, I don't have to go and balance them out in their authoritative systems where they came from. I've got them in MarkLogic where I can just simply unmerge them into the 5 records, take out the one that I don't like, and then remerge the other 4 back together. It's very simple. Last thing I'd like to show, because I know I'm hitting time here, is recall that there were human review flags. So you may not have noticed, but there's a little red icon that popped up here that I'm going to open up for our notifications. So when I go and I look at some of these records that are in here, I'm seeing records that were close, but not quite ready for merge. This was that between 43 and 60 threshold. So I've got the Peltahellers here. And what I'm looking at are all three of the records that are in question. There's the three columns here, plus a merge preview. And every red row, in essence, shows where there's a difference between one of the values for each of those rows. So I can see that I've got, John, Jonathan, and John spelled differently. I've got perhaps a variation in Peltiheller because of capitalization in the last name, over here. So it's a question of, should I merge them or should I not merge them? And in looking at this record, barring them being like the Gary Katz situation, I'd say that this is probably a good match. So I'm going to say merge them together. Now they're merged. And if I go back to my search environment here in Explorer, I search on Peltiheller, I'm going to find there's Jonathan, and there are my Peltihellers all merged together with the full lineage information of the merging that took place. Now, last but not least, what I'll finally show here is this data is only as valuable as how you use it. So when we create these applications in MarkLogic, it's for downstream consumption, so you can make use of this better data. Now, a good example from a Medicaid standpoint, where we leverage master person indices quite a bit so that we can actually figure out who is the right person that we're looking for, is to compare the pre-mastered versus the post-mastered analytics that you can get. So I've got a local version of Power BI here that I've pulled on my screen. And what I've done is for a particular subset, we just honed in on a particular zip code attribute. You're seeing the volume of people, right, in the pre-mastered flavor up here. I actually have a label there if I put that out, versus the post-mastered environment on the right side of the chart. So note that this chart is querying pre-mastered and post-mastered together, because we still have the pre-mastered data inside MarkLogic if you wanted those kinds of raw analytics as well, but more than likely, you want the cleaned up analytics that you see on the right. And lastly, we have another chart here that actually shows, the claims and the caseworkers by caseload. You could look at this from a lens of how many providers are charging my Medicaid system. If you're looking at program integrity or fraud, waste, and abuse, now you've got collapsed providers with numeric values for how much they're submitting to Medicaid in claims. You could figure out the claim amount by a diagnosis. This is helpful for population health and perhaps figuring out the social determinants of health. Figure out which are my most prevalent diagnosis codes that I'm seeing within my Medicaid community, which is Medicaid is for those who are less fortunate, who are not doing as well. So this is a certain socioeconomic part of the population where this kind of information is helpful to figuring out what steps can you proactively take to help improve this within that population. And of course, you can see any other kinds of analytics as well. This is very simple. MarkLogic is reading this data out using our relational or SQL-based, rendering of the data, because MarkLogic is multi-model. We can handle things in unstructured formats, XML, JSON, what have you. We can handle things that are semantically relationship-based and use that as part of our data cleaning strategies. And we can also leverage this for rendering data out. So the traditional BI tools, Power BI, Tableau, Click, MicroStrategy, or any other, for that matter, can hit us directly from a relational standpoint and query us with SQL. So that brings me to the end of the demonstration.